It's 11:47 p.m. on September 8th, 1999. The parking lot outside of Electronics Boutique is buzzing like a circuit board. Anxious, wired, and about to overheat. Neon signs flicker over the cracked asphalt. Teenagers in corn hoodies lean against rusted Civics, sipping Mountain Dew and quoting Fight Club. A dad with two kids clutches a plastic folding chair like he's guarding a holy grail. Some dude in a Sonic the Hedgehog t-shirt is pacing in front of the doors like he's waiting for a portal to open. And in a way, he is. Because in exactly 13 minutes, the doors will slide open, and the Sega Dreamcast, the first console of the sixth generation, is going to hit American hands. It's a new millennium minus 113 days, but for gamers, tonight is the future. The Dreamcast promises broadband, online play, graphics that look like a Pixar movie, memory cards with mini screens, and launch titles that feel like you're controlling the arcade itself. The hype is volcanic. Sega's back, baby. And if you ask the 17-year-old in front of this line, wearing his Blockbuster badge and clutching his receipt like a golden ticket, this thing is going to eat PlayStation for breakfast. He's wrong, of course, but he doesn't know that yet. None of them do. Tonight, the Dreamcast is the chosen one. A second coming for Sega. A comeback. A miracle molded in white plastic. And for a little while, it will really be all of that. To understand why the Dreamcast meant so much in 1999, you have to rewind a little. To the mess that Sega left behind in the early 90s. See, once upon a time, Sega was cool. Really cool. It was the anti-Nintendo, where Mario was wholesome and round, Sonic was sharp and rebellious. Where Nintendo stuck with cartridges, Sega embraced CDs. Sega had blast processing. Sega had attitude. The Genesis took on Super Nintendo and actually held its own. That's no small feat. In a world where Nintendo was king, Sega elbowed its way into the throne room and screamed Sega loud enough to make your CRT hum. But then, the misfires started. First came the Sega CD, a bold, expensive attempt to move into disc-based games. Some neat ideas, sure, but way too pricey. And the games, let's just say they weren't great. Then, the 32X, the mushroom-shaped add-on that sat on top of your Genesis like a tumor. Sega said it was a bridge to the next generation, but it just confused people. Developers didn't support it, gamers didn't want it, and retailers couldn't explain it. And finally, the Saturn, a technically powerful console with a clunky design, released way too early in the US. They literally surprised the retailers, with confusing marketing and a total lack of third-party support. While PlayStation was making headlines and building loyalty, Sega felt like it was fumbling in the dark. By the late 90s, Sega's rep was in shambles. Consumers were burned out. Developers were wary. Executives were panicking. But some inside Sega still believed. And if they were going to stake everything, the company, the brand, the future, on one last gamble, they called it Katana. The machine that would become the Dreamcast started taking shape in Japan in the mid-90s. Sega tasked two teams with designing a new console. One was led by Hideki Saito, a longtime Sega hardware veteran, and the other by Tatsuo Yamamoto from IBM, working with American firm 3DO. It was a console war within the company. Eventually, Sato's team won out. Their design was sleek, affordable, and easier to develop. It used a Hitachi SH4 CPU and PowerVR graphics chip. For the tech heads, this combo could pump out 3 million polygons per second. Translation, this thing was a beast for its time. But the specs were just the beginning. Sega knew that it had to win hearts, not just benchmarks. So they redesigned the controller. Chunky, bold, and a slot for something wild. The VMU. The visual memory unit was like a Tamagotchi crossed with a Game Boy Micro. It slid into the controller and had its own screen. You could download minigames, track stats, and even show health bars during matches. It was unlike anything else. Then they made a bold call. Include a modem in the box. The Dreamcast would be the first console to ship with online capabilities out of the gate. This wasn't a future concept. It was baked into the DNA. You could surf the web, check email, and yes, play games online in 1999. By late 98, the Dreamcast launched in Japan. Early reviews were solid, but the software lineup was thin. Sega of America knew it had to nail the US launch, so they circled a date on the calendar that sounded like a marketing dream. 9/9/99, and they went to war. Sega's marketing for the Dreamcast was relentless. They dropped $100 million on the US campaign. TV spots, print ads, magazine spreads, giant banners in Times Square, taglines like "It's thinking" and "The ultimate gaming system." They targeted teens and 20-somethings, gamers who'd grown up on the Genesis but felt betrayed by the Saturn. The pitch was simple. We've learned, we've listened, and we're back. Sega packed the launch lineup: Soul Calibur, NFL 2K, Sonic Adventure, Power Stone, Ready to Rumble, Hydro Thunder, House of the Dead 2, over a dozen titles, more than any launch in console history up to that point. But they weren't just filler. These games were killer. Soul Calibur looked better than its arcade version. NFL 2K blew Madden out of the water. Sonic Adventure gave Sega's Blue Blur a massive 3D world to blaze through. Then came the pre-order numbers, the press write-ups, the demo kiosks, the buzz on early internet forums and AOL chat rooms. By the time September 9th, 1999 arrived, the Dreamcast was the most anticipated console launch in history. Lines wrapped around mall corridors, systems sold out within hours, 300,000 units moved in a single day, over $98 million in revenue in just 24 hours. For one shining moment, Sega was back on top, and it felt electric. Back at that midnight launch, our Blockbuster employee finally makes it through the doors. He's handed a bright white box with orange swirls. It's heavy, dense with potential. He adds a copy of Soul Calibur to the pile, then races home like a Civic's on fire. He unboxes it on his bedroom floor. Console, controller, VMU, cords, the glimmering GD-ROM. He plugs it in. No YouTube tutorials, no day one patches, no updates, just power. The orange LED glows. The startup swirl starts across the screen, and bam, Soul Calibur's intro hits like a thunderclap. For the first time, home console graphics felt arcade perfect. The characters move like they're alive. The backgrounds swirl. The music soars. It's everything he had hoped for and more. That night, in thousands of bedrooms, dorm rooms, and basements across America, it felt like the next generation of gaming had arrived. But just off screen, something darker is stirring. Sony's got a secret, and it's about to change everything. The fall of 1999 felt like Dreamcast's moment. Everywhere you turned, it was there. On magazine covers, demo kiosks at Toys R Us, on tech TV, in conversations between freshmen in dorm halls who still had Napster downloading in the background. Dreamcast wasn't just a console. It was a comeback, a redemption story. Sega had gone from punchline to pioneer in one carefully planned launch. And for the first 6 months, the buzz was real. Critics were glowing. Gamers were glued to their TVs. Developers, especially those who had struggled with Saturn's complicated architecture, found the Dreamcast easier to build for, closer to PC-style dev tools. The games rolled in. Titles like Crazy Taxi, Jet Grind Radio, Virtua Tennis, and Choo Choo Rocket delivered experiences that felt more vibrant and daring, like someone had plugged a Dreamcast straight into the creative cortex of every arcade fanatic and experimental designer on the planet. Even more importantly, Dreamcast games looked futuristic, played futuristic. They felt like a generational leap, because they were. For months, the console had no competition in the next-gen space. PlayStation and Nintendo were still chugging along with their 5th-gen glory. The original PlayStation was nearly 5 years old. The N64 still ran cartridges. In 1999, the Dreamcast looked like something had crash-landed from the future. But under the surface of this honeymoon phase, two forces were quietly forming. One, an internal challenge that would spread Sega's resources thin, and the other, a monolithic shadow growing just beyond the horizon. Sony. Here's the wild thing. Sega wasn't just thinking about visuals, it was thinking about connection. In an era before Wi-Fi, before widespread broadband, before Xbox Live or PlayStation Network, Sega tried to take gaming online with dial-up. It was absurd, and yet, somehow, it worked. Bundled inside every US Dreamcast was a 56K modem. You plugged in a phone line, and boom, access to SegaNet. You could check email, surf the web, and most importantly, play games against other people across the country. The killer game was Quake 3 Arena, a PC staple adapted for console. It was a bit janky. You had to memorize friends' IP addresses or use clunky lobby systems, but once it worked, it was magic. Console gamers could frag each other in real time. No split screen, no multi-taps. It was new, raw, and unfinished, but it planted a flag. Other games soon followed. Phantasy Star Online, the first console MMO RPG, NFL 2K1, which let you battle your friends on a virtual gridiron, even if they lived in another state, Alien Front Online, Bomberman Online, 4x4 Evolution, a modest list, yes, but years way ahead of its time. SegaNet even offered a keyboard and broadband adapter for power users. You could host matches, mod your experience, and chat in real time. Dreamcast was laying the groundwork for what would become standard in the next generation. Xbox Live didn't launch until late 2002. PlayStation Network wasn't fully functional until 2006. In a just world, Dreamcast would have been recognized as the spark. But history doesn't reward pioneers, it rewards winners. And Sony was about to take the stage with a nuclear announcement. March 4th, 2000, Japan. Sony launches the PlayStation 2. It isn't just a game console, it's a cultural meteor. The PS2 promises better graphics, more developer support, backward compatibility with original PlayStation games, and here's the killer blow, a built-in DVD player. Let's pause on that. In 2000, DVD players were still relatively expensive. A good one might run you $250 to $300, but a PS2, just $299, and it plays games too. It was a Trojan horse for next-gen entertainment. Suddenly, people who weren't even gamers wanted a PlayStation 2. Parents, movie lovers, tech enthusiasts. It didn't matter what launch titles were available. The value proposition was unbeatable. By the time the PS2 launched in North America that October, the writing was on the wall. Retailers started pulling Dreamcast kiosks to make room. Developers shifted priorities. Third-party support, the oxygen a console lives on, began to drift. Even Sega loyalists began to waver. The Dreamcast looked cool, sure, but the PS2, that was the future, and Sega knew it. They slashed prices, boosted marketing, pushed exclusives, but the tidal wave was already forming, and every move Sega made from here on out felt like a company bracing for impact. But here's the thing. Even as Sony loomed, the Dreamcast kept delivering. Skies of Arcadia gave RPG fans one of the best adventures of the generation. Bright, bold, and filled with swashbuckling airship battles. Shenmue was a genre-defying sandbox, part detective story, part life simulator, part QTE showcase, with ambitions that still felt unreal. Jet Grind Radio introduced cell shading and a killer soundtrack, blending rebellious energy with subversive style. And Phantasy Star Online, that was a miracle. On dial-up internet, on a console, in 2000. You'd log in, type in a password using your clunky Sega keyboard, and then, bam, you were exploring alien planets with friends, trading loot, chatting in lobbies, and battling creatures in 3D space. Dreamcast may not have won the war, but it won hearts. Even third-party support lingered longer than you'd expect. Resident Evil Code Veronica, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, Dead or Alive 2. The Dreamcast became a haven for arcade ports, fighting games, and weird, brilliant oddities that didn't fit on PlayStation's tighter rails. Gamers who owned one felt like they were in a secret club, a few million early adopters getting glimpses of what gaming could be. But that magic had a headline, and it was coming faster than anyone wanted to admit. By early 2001, the Dreamcast was running on fumes. Sales had plateaued. Sega's financial reports were a mess. Despite a brilliant product, the market had shifted. PS2 was outselling everything. Nintendo's GameCube was on the horizon. Microsoft was building something called the Xbox. And Sega? Sega was nearly out of cash. They had gambled everything on the Dreamcast. But the Saturn's failure, the cost of launching a new console, the $100 million marketing blitz, and their declining arcade business had all conspired against them. On January 31st, 2001, Sega made it official. The Dreamcast was discontinued. Production would halt that March. Sega would exit the hardware business and focus on third-party game development. Just like that, the comeback was over. March 31st, 2001. There were no national headlines, no countdown, no candlelight vigils. Just a quiet statement to the press and an email to retailers. Production of the Sega Dreamcast was officially coming to an end. It felt impossible. How could something so futuristic, so beloved, vanish after just 18 months on the US market? Gamers felt it like a punch to the gut, especially those who bought in early, who believed the Dreamcast was the beginning of something, when in fact, it had been the end all along. Forums lit up. Message boards buzzed. There were no live streams or social media eulogies, but the sense of collective grief was real. To some, it felt like a betrayal. Sega had burned them before, with the Sega CD, the 32X, the Saturn, but this time it felt different. This time, Sega had delivered. The hardware was clean. The games were phenomenal. The vision was ahead of its time. And still, it wasn't enough. The Dreamcast wasn't pulled because it was bad. It was pulled because the world changed faster than Sega could keep up. But even after Sega announced its exit from hardware, the Dreamcast didn't go quietly. 2001 saw a strange, almost ghostly final wave of releases. It was like watching a concert after the lights had been shut off, a defiant encore in the shadows. Ikaruga, a beautiful, brutal bullet hell shooter. Rez, a synthetic on-rails rhythm shooter that felt like it had been developed through a portal from the future. Cosmic Smash, a surreal blend of Breakout and Tron in a vaporware dreamscape. And then Capcom vs. SNK 2, Border Down, Under Defeat, a string of Japan-only imports that found their way to Western fans through boot discs, mod chips, and sheer devotion. It was like a second life built on stubbornness. Sega wasn't pushing these titles on TV or in magazines. Retail shelves were clearing out Dreamcast inventory to make room for PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube. But the fans kept showing up. On forums like Dreamcast Talk and DCEMU, players traded tips, burned discs, imported memory cards, and kept the lights on. Something about the Dreamcast invited loyalty, not just because of what it had been, but because of what it almost became. And then something weird happened. As the dust settled, the Dreamcast didn't vanish. It became mythic, like a cult film that had flopped on release only to become a late-night sensation. The Dreamcast began to rise again, not in the mainstream, but in the fringes, among collectors, importers, homebrewers, and old-school fans. Why? Because unlike other failed systems like the Jaguar or 3DO, or even the Saturn, the Dreamcast worked. It had a deep, polished library. It ran smooth. It had iconic characters, killer ports, innovative ideas, and a community willing to die on that hill. People started to notice. Articles were written. Underrated console lists always put Dreamcast near the top. YouTubers began highlighting forgotten gems. Shenmue, Jet Grind Radio, Power Stone, Skies of Arcadia. They were no longer flops. They were cult classics. And then the emulation scene exploded. Null DC, Riecast, Redream. Suddenly, people who had missed out in 1999 could relive the magic on PCs, phones, or even Raspberry Pis. They could boot up Crazy Taxi in 1080p or run Sonic Adventure 2 with mods. Meanwhile, collectors hunted down hardware. Dreamcasts sold out on eBay. Fan translations of Japan-only games popped up. People modded their systems with GDEMU cards, HDMI outputs, and painted shells. The Dreamcast became retro royalty, not because it lasted, but because it had left too soon. Let's talk about heartbreak. The worst kind isn't when something ends, it's when something ends before it ever had the chance to become what it was supposed to be. And that is the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast wasn't a failure in the traditional sense. It didn't bomb because it was bad. It wasn't obsolete, it wasn't overpriced, and it didn't lack great games. It failed because the ecosystem had already decided who the winners were going to be. Sony had the brand power. Microsoft had infinite money. Nintendo had franchises no one could ever touch. Sega, by contrast, had a shaky reputation and no margin for error. One stumble, and it was over. And when the PS2 showed up with a DVD drive, a cleaner dev kit, and the promise of backwards compatibility, that stumble came fast. But here's the twist. So many of the things we associate with modern gaming Dreamcast did them first. Online multiplayer? Dreamcast. Digital storefronts and downloadable content? Dreamcast. Second screen integration? Dreamcast VMU. Arcade perfect fighting game ports? Dreamcast. Massive multiplayer console RPGs? Dreamcast. Cel-shaded graphics? Dreamcast. The blueprint was there. It had just arrived too soon, from a company that had burned too many bridges. In another timeline, Sega holds on. Maybe they find a financial backer. Maybe DVD drive becomes optional. Maybe online multiplayer becomes a breakout hit earlier. But we don't live in that timeline. We live in the one where Dreamcast vanished while still glowing. By 2002, Dreamcast had all but disappeared from store shelves. Sega pivoted from hardware to software. They brought Sonic Adventure to GameCube. They inked deals with Microsoft and Sony. They went from hardware kings to third-party hustlers. And to their credit, they survived. But something changed forever. The era of experimentation, of arcade-born magic, of taking risks with weird games and hardware gimmicks, that era dimmed a little when the Dreamcast died. Sure, there were innovations ahead. Xbox Live, Wii motion controls, indie game booms, VR. But nothing ever quite felt like the Dreamcast again. It was a console that burned bright, fast, and hot. It didn't get a sequel it deserved. It didn't make a comeback. It didn't launch a franchise. It just faded. And yet, in bedrooms and basements around the world, you can still find it. A scuffed up white box with an orange swirl. A controller with a weird little screen. A disc for Power Stone 2. A VMU that still chirps when you boot it up. It's not dead. It's just dreaming. For most consoles, death is permanent. The NES lives on in nostalgia. The Xbox 360 is remembered fondly, but it's over. Saturn? A curiosity. TurboGrafx? A trivia question. But the Dreamcast resurrected. Something strange started happening in the late 2000s and early 2010s. A console that had been buried by the mainstream was showing up again, on collector lists, in video essays, in indie development circles. The once abandoned swirl logo became a badge of honor. Suddenly, eBay prices rose. Fans were buying up Dreamcast like vintage vinyl. Gamers who missed the launch era and wanted to see what the hype had been about. Old owners were dusting theirs off and modding them with custom LEDs, region-free firmware, or GDEMU flashcard loaders. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was appreciation. Recognition. A collective, wait a second, this thing is awesome. Collectors started building Dreamcast shelves. Instagram accounts were dedicated entire grids to showcasing cover art, like Cannon Spike and Gigawing 2. YouTube creators like Metal Jesus, Modern Vintage Gamer, and Dreamcast Guy dove deep into obscure releases and hidden hardware tricks. What other console could you say that about? A decade after it died. It didn't just survive, it thrived in the afterlife. And then came the most unexpected twist of all. The Dreamcast got a second wave of games. Not remasters, not emulated ports. Brand new physical games. Developers, many of them indie or hobbyist teams, began building games specifically for the Dreamcast, often publishing them in real jewel cases, complete with manuals, printed discs, and even VMU support. Studios like QCast, NGDev, and JoshProd kept the torch burning with releases like Gunlord, a love letter to run-and-gun platformers, Stormwind, a gorgeously animated side-scrolling shooter, Elysian Shadows, a pixel art RPG engine built to push the hardware to its limits, Alice Dreams Tournament, a party battle game clearly inspired by Bomberman. How? Because the Dreamcast dev tools had leaked. Because the system's CD-based GD-ROM format had workarounds. Because Sega didn't stop it. They actually encouraged it. In an industry obsessed with next-gen 4K live services and subscription models, here was a 20-year-old console hosting brand new physical releases from passionate developers. It was beautiful. A living console without a corporate parent. A DIY ecosystem. A dream still casting. It's not just the games that kept the Dreamcast relevant. It was the vibe. Something about the aesthetic. The chunky controller with a weird screen. The startup chime. The translucent VMUs. The swirl. They all became iconic. Dreamcast didn't just look like the future. It looked like a particular kind of future. That jet set radio energy, the Dreamcast orange, the graffiti fonts, the thumping beats and cel-shaded visuals, the arcade menus with techno flourishes. It felt like a design language from a cyberpunk Saturday morning cartoon. And that influence, it never really went away. You see it in indie games like Lethal League Blaze or Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, both spiritual cousins of Jet Set Radio. You see it in synthwave art, in fashion brands that remix late 90s graphics, in SoundCloud producers who sample Dreamcast boot noises and layer them under breakbeats. Even AAA studios borrow from that dream space. Splatoon owes a debt to the Dreamcast color-splashed attitude. Hi-Fi Rush plays like a lost cousin to Space Channel 5, and Samba de Amigo. The Dreamcast style wasn't just ahead of its time, it was outside of it, timeless in its boldness. And then there are the fans, the ones still coding new firmware, building broadband adapters, printing high-res custom covers, running tournaments for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on CRT and retro arcades. They hang out in Discord servers and on old-school forums. They track down Japanese imports. They post photos of their pristine Dreamcast setups with VGA boxes, SCART converters, and perfectly aligned shelves. Some are casual collectors. Others are obsessed preservationists. All of them are curators of a ghost console that refuses to stay dead. There's something uniquely Dreamcast about this kind of fandom. It's not just about playing the games. It's about honoring the possibility that the console represented. The idea that a system could be this strange, this advanced, this open, and still be fun. It's a different kind of nostalgia, not just for childhood, but for a moment when the future felt exciting and not yet corporatized into sameness. Maybe that's why the Dreamcast still haunts people. It's not just what it was, it's what it could have been. It could have ushered in a golden age of online console gaming before Xbox. It could have held the fighting game scene better at its center. It could have let Sega develop its way out of financial ruin while redefining what consoles could be. It could have meant Shenmue 3 in 2003 instead of 2019. It could have been the platform where Phantasy Star Online changed MMOs forever, where Skies of Acadia got a sequel, where the arcade spirit didn't vanish, it evolved. But it didn't happen. And that loss, the potential, is what makes the Dreamcast more than just a console. It's a memory of a turn the industry could have taken. A what if that never stops echoing. Which is why, more than 20 years later, people are still modding, collecting, programming, and dreaming in swirl orange and static blue. Because the Dreamcast didn't die. It paused. And somewhere, in basements and bedrooms, it's still thinking. There's a reason people still talk about the Dreamcast like it was a friend who moved away too soon. That moment when you first powered it on and saw the orange swirl come to life, that split second before the game loaded, and you weren't just waiting, you were hoping. Hoping this one would be the one to blow your mind. And somehow, more often than not, it did. Like sticking the VMU into your controller and seeing your fighter's health bar pop up in Soul Calibur. Like blasting through the neon craziness of Crazy Taxi. Like skating through the cel-shaded cityscapes in Jet Grind Radio, tagging graffiti while the beat dropped. The Dreamcast wasn't a box full of plastic and wires. It was a box full of possibility. And every time you turned it on, it felt like a leap into the unknown. Even now, in an era of 4K remakes and AAA sameness, there's still nothing quite like it. Because the Dreamcast didn't follow the trends. It invented them. But for all its ambition, for all its innovation, charm, and creativity, the Dreamcast couldn't escape one thing: the market. It couldn't overcome the years of mistrust after Sega's past stumbles. It couldn't match Sony's Media Machine or compete with the DVD player bundled inside the PlayStation 2. It couldn't fight off the looming giants of Microsoft and Nintendo without allies. It couldn't hold back time. And so, it faded. Not because it didn't deserve to win, but because deserving to win has never been how the console wars work. When the Dreamcast died, we didn't just lose a console. We lost a version of the future. One that might have been more daring, more open, more arcade, more weird. A future where Sega was still swinging for the fences, where innovation didn't always have to be practical, where style mattered, where fun mattered. We lost the console that dreamed too big, too soon. And yet, Here we are, over 2 decades later, people are still talking about the Dreamcast, still buying them, still modding them, still wearing shirts with the swirl, still sampling the startup sounds of their mixtape, still calling it their favorite console of all time. Why? Because memory is emotional. Because the things that leave early sometimes leave the deepest impressions. Because the Dreamcast had soul. It was scrappy. It was flawed. It was brilliant. It was Sega giving everything they had one last time before letting go. And for the people who were there, waiting in the midnight launch line, flipping through Electric Gaming monthly spreads, mailing in rebate cards to get a second controller, it meant something. Not just a game system, but a moment in time. A flicker of what if. The Dreamcast never got a sequel. Sega never made another home console. But its influence lives on, not just in games or systems, but in people. The developers it inspired, the indie devs it empowered, the fans who kept its servers alive long after SegaNet shut down, the collectors who preserve every last inch of its legacy. Dreamcast DNA pulses through every risky, colorful punk rock game that dares to zig when the industry zags. It's in the cel-shaded smile of Hi-Fi Rush. It's in the community-made ports of Phantasy Star Online servers. It's in the arcade spirit of Fighting EX Layer, the street fashion of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, the lo-fi beats of synthwave Twitch streams looping Dreamcast menus as visuals. It's in the idea that gaming can be weird and loud and messy and fun and hopeful, even if the world says otherwise. Because the Dreamcast never cared what the market thought. It cared about you. If you still own a Dreamcast, dig it out, plug it in, turn it on, watch the swirl come to life, hear the warm hum, feel the pulse of potential again. Maybe the disk drive stutters a little. Maybe the VMU battery is dead. Maybe your copy of Sonic Adventure is scratched from one too many nights of Chaos Emerald runs. That's okay. That's part of it. Because the Dreamcast isn't about perfection. It's about possibility. It's about that moment in time when Sega, for one last time, said, "We're still in this. We're still thinking. We still believe." And for a brief, brilliant window, they made you believe too. The Sega Dreamcast wasn't just the first console of a new generation. It was the last console of a lost one. A generation built on risk, on rebellion, on arcade floors and analog triggers and pixelated dreams. It burned bright, it burned fast, and it left a legacy far bigger than its sales charts ever showed. Because even though the Dreamcast is gone, it's still dreaming, and so are we.